recording. So now it is recording. The audio is on. Okay, recording. Okay, so I can share the website. Okay, and now we will. So you should be seeing this. So we're gonna go to ITS 362. Yeah, section 1. And then now we're going to go into content, and we are going to take a look at the homework again. We'll start there because that will refresh my memory of what it is that you have to do. And then, of course, you know, I can kind of give you some hints. I'm not going to write any code for that. I'm just going to give you ideas. Again, you know, it's your homework, so I want you guys to think about it, but I do want to provide some help. So let's see. So this homework is due when? Due February 25th, right? So this homework assignment is due on Thursday, but you will have until the 27th, really. So that's the Saturday. Okay, so you have until Saturday. So let's take a look at the Word document again, kind of just to remind ourselves. So hopefully you've all started this assignment. The goal on here is, you know, the great calculator, but now with jQuery. So to understand how jQuery works, pretty much to learn to use jQuery in the client-side scripting, to learn to develop a client-side application using jQuery. So this is your first time that you're trying to do that. Okay, so I'll provide a little bit of help there. So this lab is based on the previous lab 2, not the object-oriented programming one, but the previous one to that. You're going to revise it so that jQuery will be used. You should use jQuery as much as possible, even though many tasks can be done with JavaScript alone. And you know, it is the process of, it has been the process historically that, you know, from JavaScript to jQuery and then back to JavaScript. JavaScript is actually one of the most used programming languages in the world as well. So it's impressive how much it is used. So here's a few requirements. Number 1, each assignment, lab, quiz, etc., should be added to the HTML page as needed. All right, so they should just, whereas in the first homework they were static, all those text boxes were static, and you were, you know, sort of not very impressed with that. Now it's the opposite of that. They, you know, the requirements that they should not be there, and you have to dynamically create them. So it should be added as needed. So today I'll go over that, some ideas there. When your HTML page is loaded, there should be no assignment text boxes. You will need to provide a mechanism such as buttons to add text boxes as needed. Please make sure that each type of assignment should not exceed its limit. So if you have 12 labs, then there, you know, I shouldn't be able to create a 13th text box. Remember, please provide default values for all these things. It saves me time, so I don't have to enter those. Or Mitch, if he's grading. For example, there are up to 10 lab assignments, okay? So, you know, keep that in mind. The grade calculation should be done without pressing the calculate or submit button. Instead, it should calculate the grade as you enter or change the value in any text box. So, you know, you will need to use some kind of special event with the text boxes, right? So the idea is you're entering a value and immediately the grade is changing, right? Even Brightspace, when I do that, I have to press buttons. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't even do this. Additionally, number 3, you should use the each method. So I know I've given you an example of that. I remember giving you that example, but today I'll provide, you know, another suggestion on that. As I said, I'm just going to write those hints, if you want to think of them that way, on the whiteboard, and I'll let you guys, you know, see if that helps you. So you should use the each method of selected elements to calculate the grade and total percentage points. Please review the section on traversal in jQuery for details. So you can look at the slides as well that I provided. Those can be of assistance. You should test your code in at least 2 different browsers. That's for your own. Remember, I will only be grading on Firefox. You should have a separate CSS file. I noticed a lot of people are doing that now, which is good. And a separate JS file for the JavaScript. Okay, so CSS and JS. So you guys have been pretty good about that. And then follow good coding styles. You know, you guys know how to code and adopt meaningful names and good naming conventions. I always look at your code. I always run it, and then I always, even if it works just fine, I always take a glance at it. Obviously, this one, I'll be looking at it more so because, you know, I need to make sure that you did things in jQuery. Just like if we do in other tools, you know, I'll be checking for that. So you can combine some JavaScript, but just remember, do you know, follow as much jQuery as possible. Okay. And then, of course, as always, you'll submit an electronic Word document plus all your code files so that I can run. I haven't really had any issues. Make sure everything you put in a zip file. From what I can remember right now, everything has been pretty well submitted, I think. All right, so that's the homework, right? That's due at the earliest Thursday night. You have until Saturday. So now I'm gonna switch over to the whiteboard over here and just kind of give you some ideas. Again, you know, I'm not, this is only to maybe help you if you're stuck somewhere. And if you already have a solution, whether it's the same or better than mine, you know, use your own. Go with whatever is comfortable to you to accomplish the assignment, okay? So I have it here. I was looking at this earlier. Right. So what are some approaches that you can take? So obviously I'm not going to say anything about the CSS file. I leave that to you guys and your knowledge from 110, but we can take a look at the HTML, right, and the .js file. So let's say code.js, and then you have your, you know, index or whatever you want to call it, .html or HTML. All right, so these are the two files that you're taking a look at. And so you have to do certain things. So one potential approach to this is just to have a table, right? So some students in the past have created tables. For this, they create a whole bunch of divs, but then they have one main table, okay? You can use forms if you'd like, although we're not really submitting any data right now. We're only creating, you know, in the MVC model, we're only creating the views, right? So if you remember that we're programming in model view control, and pretty much all we're doing is the views, which, if you remember, are just usually the HTML, you know, anything that's client side, really, CSS and, you know, JavaScript. All right, so one approach to this is to create a table, right? So let's create a table, and then you can call it something like, you know, input table, like that, right? You're going to close it, of course, down here. So within this table, you could say, well, I want to have, and I'm only going to do this for like two things, right? But let's say, and as I said, this may not be the way that you tackle this, okay? So that it's entirely up to you. As long as you do a good job, you know, it's not really, you don't have to do it this way. You could use divs, etc. But let's say that you take a table approach, then you could do something like, all right, well, I'm going to have a table row here, right? And the table row could have, you know, its own ID as well. And you're going to say, you know, row, whatever, right? So row 1. Okay. And you have that. And so that, you know, you're going to close that table row. Right, and I hope that's enough room. So then within that table row, you can have table data, right? You can have several things in there, table data. You could have, for instance, you could have, let's say 3. Let's say that you're going to make this as 3 columns, right? So it's going to be table data, and then you can say ID, and in this case, it's going to be labs, or my labs, or whatever you want to call it. Okay, so you do that one there. And then what do you put in that? Well, basically here, you don't have to, just some message. These are my labs. So maybe a title. Okay, so you can think of it that way. Obviously, the formatting and all that, I leave to you. Now, the second one could be a button, right? So the second one could be a button where you say table data, you can align it however you want. And then you can say, in this table data, I'm going to have an input, which is going to be type. And then I'm going to say button. Okay? And then, of course, you need to give this button some kind of a name. So ID equal button, for labs, right? So that's the button for labs. All right, so that's going to be tied to something else. And then you can say something like the value could be, add lab. Do you see that? And then you close this button and you close the table data. Let me just close it like that. Okay, so that's one line. And so now you have in the table a lab, you have a button, and now the next table data cell you could use, for instance, and just leave it as a placeholder. Call it lab field. Oops. So you could call it lab field, right? And so now you have this table row, and this is where you're going to store all of your labs. So all of your labs are going to be stored here. So whenever you press the button, you're going to want to do something to lab field, for instance. Okay? So that's one approach. Okay? The same thing would apply then. You can create other rows. So you could create a row for quizzes. You can create a row for exams. You could create a row for projects. You can create a row for extra credit. Okay? And participation, right? So you can do all that. Okay? And then obviously somewhere else in your example, you could show, or in your HTML page, then you could show the results. Okay, but in this case, okay, so that's sort of a scenario that we can use for the grade calculator. Okay, so that you could call this the input table as you called it here, or something along those lines. Now the key thing is the ID, right? So let's take the scenario. So I'm just going to say ... for the other assignment. So what's important here is, for instance, lab field. Okay, so now let's take a look at, now somewhere else, I guess, we could create another table on the HTML page. I'm going to stay with the idea of labs. And so we could say another table with some other ID, right? Another table, maybe table 2. Okay. Okay. And in here, you could also have, just like before, table rows. So you can have tr tag. And you can add an ID if you think it's necessary or not. And then in here, what you could have is you could have another table data with an ID, and then this one you can call labs, if you will. So notice the previous one was called lab field. So I'm gonna, lab field for that ID. And then this one is called labs. Okay, so notice the difference there. So you then can close this. You can put in whatever you want here, but this gives us an idea. Okay, so we have our, way of grabbing, cells in the table and trying to manipulate them in some way, right? Trying to manipulate them in some way. So now the next thing is, now that you have the HTML, okay, you're ready to move on to the JavaScript, okay, or sorry, the jQuery in this case. So you know how to add jQuery to the jQuery links, right? So I'll just focus basically on the code itself. So, so you'll have to think of how you're going to store the total values, okay? You could use cookies, you could use global variables, you'll have to think about that. I leave that to you. But let's start with the basic idea, okay? So obviously, when you start the code, right? So this is the .js, okay? So one of the things you'll do is, you can maybe grab the document, right? Document.ready. And then you're going to initialize things, right? So you can start a function here, right? And then, perform some initialization of your variables. So declaring any needed counter variables, because you have to keep track of the number of labs, right? So you can say, for instance, lab counter. Remember, I'm only doing this for like one set. Labs, quizzes, exams. You'd have to repeat it for every single one. But lab counter, that allows you to count, where you are. You're going to increment it. You could also have another one that says the max number of labs, right? So max labs. So how many labs do you guys need for this assignment?
10.
How many?
10.
10. All right, so 10. Okay, so you have that. And then once you've completed this, then what else do you want to do? Maybe you want to go back to the table code over here, and there's something else, right? If you notice, when we created the button, we did not associate, a function with this button, right? So we don't know what to do when the button is pressed. And this applies for all the buttons, right? So maybe one of the things you want to consider is, okay, maybe I need to assign a button, an event. So just keep in mind here, I'm going to erase this one because, this code would continue, okay? So this code would continue. So obviously, here is ... You do it for all the labs. The next thing you want to do, and I'm just going to do this and move to the next page. So assume it's kind of a line in there. All right, now I want to link my button. So with jQuery, I'm going to grab the button, right? And I'm going to say, lab button or something. What did we call it? Oh, button lab. So it's button lab. Just use something consistent, right? Use something consistent in your notation, but there you can grab the button. This, I also showed you how to do this last week, right? So we did some examples of this where we wanted to tie it to something, so we can do .click. You see that? And by doing click now, I can create an anonymous function. So I'm going to do function there. And then again, open curly bracket. Again, I'm not closing these. Just keep track of the fact that you would have to close them, okay? So now what's the question here? Well, the question is you have to add a text box if the previous counter does not exceed the maximum, right? So that's the first thing. So you want to say something that, if if, whatever lab counter is less than or equal or less than max labs, etc., then you're going to perform some task. And again, I'm opening the curly bracket here. So what are you going to do? Well, you're going to create the text box. You have to give it an index, right? You have to give it an index so that you can differentiate the IDs because you want different names. Okay, so then you can say, you also need to have some parameters like the maximum number of points, the default value for the text box. I'll let you guys figure all of that out. But basically, you want to create a text box. So what do you link it to? Well, we link it to lab field, right? So if you notice, I had highlighted in purple over here, lab field. That could be a place where you create the text boxes, okay? So then I'm gonna go back into my code over here, and I'm just gonna say, same thing. If this is correct, right, I'm gonna do some things, ... But then one important thing is once all the data is ready, I'm going to grab lab field. So I grab lab field, and what do I do to it? I append. I'm going to append to it something else, right? So I'm going to append to it some HTML code. This is similar to when you guys did like inner HTML, if you remember, right? So you're going to do something like that. So here you can do what is it? Input type equal text, right? And then, obviously here, the trick is the ID, right? So the ID needs to be a combination of, some name, like let's say labs, plus, and you have to, so that this might be something that it's probably better to do it outside and then just put the variable in here, right? In the loop. Does this make sense, guys?
Yeah, makes sense.
I'm just going to say something like name with index, right? So something like that. And so some kind of a variable, you have to put it together in there, where that here would be something like name with index, right? And it's just going to be obviously, the name is lab and then plus the concatenation and then add the index. So you need to have that lab counter, for instance, could be the index, but just make sure you increment it every time you add a text box. You have to keep track of that. All right, so you will put in, then the name, right? And that's pretty much it. Also, please add, default values. Okay. So these are the things that you have to do. But this basically does do it. Okay, so this basically will allow us to add text boxes to the field. Okay. And you might want to have some additional, so you might want to have the lab counter incremented here every time you do this. It's a lab counter plus. Okay. And then any other things, cosmetic things that you think might be good. And this could be an approach that you could take for adding the text boxes, right? So you can try that, play with this code. Obviously, I don't want to give you the solution, so I want you guys to figure it out sort of on your own, but hopefully this gives you enough intuition that you can solve it. And you would apply the same thing for all other things. So if you have quizzes, you take the button, just like here, right? Quizzes button. Let me use another color. Right, so you would use the quizzes button, same thing. You click, do a click event, and then you tie it to a function where the function basically, once again, checks the counters, just like here, creates the name, right? So you create the name, the new name, and then you need to find, instead of lab field, right, it would be quiz field. So, something quiz field over here, right, but for another table row. Okay, and so you can try that out, that logic. So you would do quiz field, append, and then everything else, right? Everything that goes in here, the creating the text box, input type text with the ID, where the ID needs to be something like that. You need to craft that basically. And that's it. You can repeat that process for the exams. You can repeat that process for the projects, for the extra points, for participation, etc. So that's one way of doing it, okay? Are there any questions about this portion?
I don't think so.
Okay, good. So the next part is, what else do we need? We still need to do the calculations, right? So when you do this text box, it's basically you're adding the text boxes, but you haven't entered any data in the text boxes, right? So you're pressing those buttons, and text boxes are just being added in there. Now, we don't need buttons for the text boxes because the problem quite clearly states that all of this, whenever you enter a 7 or something, the grade updates. So that means that a student had an F and had a 56, then they type 70 in here without pressing any buttons, and immediately it switches to D and let's say 62 or something like that, right? So it automatically should do it. So now you have to think about this part. And this part you could call something like event handlers for calculations, maybe. So you need to have an event handler for the grade calculation, which is that thing. So for the grade calculation. Okay, so that's what you need to do. So now here's the question: how are you going to do this? So again, there's a lot of possibilities that you could try. One suggestion is, what would be one suggestion? Let me think. Yeah, what about, let's see. Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next page, right? And let's think about this one. We can probably do somewhere in your code, right? Use jQuery to grab the object again, document, and then you can say .on. And this is a way of when an event like on something, do this. And what would be the event? Key up. So key up is an event that would allow you to link the document to the action of keying or pressing a key. And you can try other things, right? But this is a suggestion there. So press a key on your keyboard, and so it triggers an event. Basically, you're typing on one of the text boxes, for instance. Okay. So on key up, and you'll have to figure it out a little bit how it works. But now, if you remember, let me just make sure I did something right. Yeah. Okay. So we did text, right? when we were creating the inputs, we called them text as in text boxes. So then you could do on key up with a further filter that says, oh yeah, by the way, I mean text. So that just means that this key up only applies to text boxes, right? So that's a further filter. And then after that, but as I said, there could be other approaches that you take, right? This is just a suggestion. And then the last thing is, well, might as well just get the function in there, right? So what am I going to do? What do I actually do on key up on the text boxes? All right, and then comes, you know, the other part of the code, right? So now what do I do? So what do you guys think you should do at that time?
Loop through all of the existing text boxes that have been created dynamically and add up their totals.
Perfect, exactly. You have to get, maybe you've created 3 text boxes, or you have 7, or you have all 10 already. Well, doesn't matter. You look for the existing ones, and you add up their total. Exactly. Very good. So in that case, what you might want to do is you might want to, once again, in the code, gather values for all fields. Okay, so this is the next sort of suggestion here. So how are you going to consider doing that? Well, again, jQuery function, and then pick, input where the type is equal to text, which are basically all your text boxes that exist, right? And if you remember, then something like this will return the set of all of them, right? Something like this will return the set of all of your text boxes. And now what you need to do is just basically add them. So you have a set, you need to go through all of them. That's an iteration. So if you remember, we covered an example last week, which was called the each. Right, so you can do each, and then basically this now will allow you to iterate through all the text boxes. So you can associate this right away with the anonymous function here, and that's it, right? So now you have the code segment where you just need to add all the values. Okay, so you will need to have for each text box, you need to have its ID and its value. So this is a thing that might be a little bit tricky, right? But sometimes you can have like an event associated here, an event, and then grab the parameters. I think we did something like that at the very beginning of the semester. Another way is to use this statement. And what that means is let's say, for instance, let's say that, let me change the color. Let's change, for instance, that this is a set, right? It's a set of, let's say 3 things, okay? So now every iteration that you're in an each, you grab one. You grab this one. The next iteration in the each, you grab this one, and the next one, you grab that one, right? So basically, in every iteration, you grab one of these, which is basically the text box itself. So you have the text box. So now what you could possibly do is you could say, well, I want to grab the text box. So I'm going to say something like let ID, and I'm going to say this. You see that? You use the jQuery function to grab this, right, which is that text box. And then from it, I want the attribute, which would be the ID, okay? And I could also get the value. So I can get let element or value, and it's going to be, again, this dot val. You see that? So you can get, as you're iterating through all the items, you can grab the element. We've done some examples of this. Grab the element, and now from the element, take out the pieces that you need, okay? Then, of course, you should probably check the element, make sure there's a value in there, that it's not blank, all those kinds of things. It's got to be a string most likely, so you will need to parse it maybe, right? And then just, you know, add it. So that's really what you could do. Now, there's one problem though. And what's that problem? What's the problem with this when you add these values? Is that they have different weights, right? So labs are worth, I don't know, 100, quizzes are worth 25, you know, participation is worth 5, I think. So maybe the solution is to do this several times and do the calculations individually, or you have to figure out some way, maybe by the ID, right? If you have the ID, you could say, well, you know what? I have the ID. I can tell what I'm looking at. If this element is a lab, you know, I can tell by the ID. Therefore, I'm going to process it with the calculations of that and so on. Okay?
Sounds good.
Sounds good, right? Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I don't have to tell you, you know, you got the ID, you know, treat it as a string, process it, you know, take a portion of it, look for something in it, etc. And that's, you know, that's pretty much it. Once you've grabbed all of these, because you're already in this, let me change color here, because you're here in the each, right? So you're grabbing all the elements. Once you've grabbed all the elements, you know, all 12 labs, all 2 exams, all 15 quizzes, whatever the numbers are, you know, you got the ID and the element that gets you the information about that. Because remember, you are grabbing text boxes. And if you remember, when you defined those text boxes, you had a lot of information in them. You don't need variables, right? You have these. You know, it's a text box over here. It's got the ID, which is really important. It says lab on it. You know, the counter wouldn't really matter that much. You have the default values, max values, etc. So that all of that you can parse out from these, okay, to add the values and do your processing. And then, you know, at the end, then obviously you will do your multiplications, the equation, and then the letter grade. So if the grade is, you know, between 60 and 70, that's a D, and so on. And then finally, I'm sure I don't have to tell you this, somewhere we created a table that had 2 sections, right? Oops. This was the display part of the table. So then all you have to do when you're done is, let's say labs is the thing that you want to use. So then you would just say, you know, once you've done the calculation, I'll move to the next page. Once you've done gone through the calculation, you would just simply grab, I think it was called labs. You grab labs. Maybe I should call it labs result. Where was it? Labs, let's say result. So it's a little bit more obvious. And then all we have to do is labs result, grab it, and then, you know, dot text, and then, you know, whatever the answer is. Or you have one, you know, you might want to print results for, I don't know if I don't remember if the lab said that you had to print a grade for labs and one for quizzes. So however you want to do it, or what, actually not however you want to do it, but follow whatever the document says. All right, and that's it. That, I believe, that gets you done with this assignment. Okay, so I really wanted to help you out there because I know this one's a little bit more complex, but I think that's good enough.
Okay. Questions?
Yeah,
Excuse me.
Questions.
A brief question.
Your question?
The question is that this according to the assignment requirement, we should not use the button to submit it. So can we use such as a list of words, such like last class showed, and we use that list of words text to submit. Set it as a click. We can click the text to submit.
Okay, so if I understood you correctly, your issue is that so let's actually go to the document, okay? Let's go to the document. So if I understand correctly, your issue was that it says the grade, this one, right? Number 2. That's Sir, what's your name?
Ranzhao.
The issue is number 2, right? So the grade calculation should be done without pressing the calculate or submit button, correct?
Yeah.
All right. Because here for the text box, you do have a button. But here for number 2, you should not use a button, right? And that's exactly what I suggested also by doing this. So maybe you missed that part. So here's the buttons for creating the text boxes, but here is this part here for calculating the grade. So maybe I should have written here, calculate or calc grade without pressing a button.
So it will automatically works to calculate the grade.
That's right.
This part.
This part. Very good. So that's what I had suggested. Remember, this is one approach, because if you think about it, what's happening here is, what are you doing? You're creating you're creating an event, right? Think about it. You grab document and you say dot, and then you say on key up on text boxes. So what this means is that whenever you go to a text box and you start typing on the text box, that event is key up on text. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, so you will automatically clear the input.
That's right. It'll calculate the grades because this is the event on key up. So now think about it. You grab the text boxes, right? Any text box. And then on key up of that text box that you're typing something, an event is going to be triggered. And then what's the response to the event? Well, it's this function over here, right? And so what does this function say? It says gather values of all fields. You see that? That's where you do the input type text. You grab all of them, which is what I explained here, do the each, and then you just process them and add them. So you don't have to press a button. Every time you're typing, basically this is running. You understand?
Got it.
What?
Got it.
You got it.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right, good. So that was a great question. Any other questions, guys?
No questions.
Good questions. So make sense. All right, so I think this should be enough to help you guys to, solve it on your own. All right, so I leave it obviously in your hands now. And that, that concludes all the material for that homework assignment, which basically means we are now ready for Jquery Ui. Right, so Jquery Ui is even easier than this Jquery. And it's just really playing around with some of these, the presentation of a form. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save this file actually. And I'll just upload it for you guys to have available. So remind me if for some reason I forget to load this. Okay. So this is Give me a sec. I'm trying to load that. Okay, so let's stop sharing this. I'm gonna share the. All right, I'm gonna share this one. So there's Jquery, and let's go. So before we move on to the next topic, we'll just, we don't have that, I've used up some of the time today, so I'll probably just get started with Jquery UI. So here, though, in Jquery, let me just add those notes. As I said, there are other solutions. Over the years, I've seen students, do really interesting solutions to problems like this. So, use your own creativity if you'd like. All right, so it's Jquery grade calculator. All right. So you can probably see it now. So if you click on, it's a PDF. Yeah, so there it is. So you can use this, kind of think about it, see if that approach is what you find interesting. All right. All right. So now that that's concluded, we can go back to the table of contents here. You should be seeing, yeah, you're all seeing bright space. And so now, work is set. Okay, everything's there. All right, so now we are ready then to move to Jquery UI. All right, Jquery UI. And as you can see here, I provided an example of a progress bar. And obviously there will be a homework associated with this one as well. As you might guess, it's nothing more than taking the grade calculator with Jquery and you're gonna add these controls, okay? So we're gonna take a look at, and I clicked on this too. We're gonna take a look at the slides first today, and then after that, I will look at, we'll do examples just like we usually do, and then we'll probably continue those examples on Thursday. Next week, then probably on Tuesday, we'll start, some new topic, or maybe just go back to, like JavaScript itself to take a look at some additional things in pure JavaScript. All right, so let's download this slide. I'm just going to open it. All right, so now where are we? We are in Jquery Slides. And there's really not that much on this really. So the slides are, it just gives you an idea, a quick overview of how this works. Okay, and a few other things you might consider. So let's take a look at Jquery. All right, so let's see. I need to share this. Okay, you should see that now. All right, there we go. So these are the slides for Jquery UI. Just really quick overview. Still on the client side, so we're still on the client side for a little while longer. But like I said, once we get into the server side, that doesn't mean that we won't still be able to do client side. So what I'll probably, but at the same time, I can't just keep doing client side and wait too long for the server side because your term project is coming up, okay? And maybe right now actually would be a good time to talk about your term project, given that we are currently on week 7. And the sooner I get you guys working on this, the better. So what is the term project? So what are going to be some of the terms? So I want groups of 3, no more than 3. You could have groups of 2, but this is going to be a lot of coding, so I recommend groups of 3. You're going to build a project from scratch. Okay, so you're going to build a project from scratch. You need to make sure that you follow MVC, which that's a very important thing. Model view control. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Yeah, so it's groups of 3. It's gonna basically going to include, it's a project where you can build whatever you want, and you just have to use everything that we have learned in the class. So far, you can do some things with, JavaScript. You can do some things with jQuery, jQuery Ui, you know, other the other tools that we will look at later, like PHP, maybe a little bit of Node.js, MySQL, obviously, just the connections to databases. You will also do this in Linux. So we're going to talk about LAMP, the LAMP stack, which stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. All right, so you need to now at this point start looking for a VM. Find a VM, Ubuntu 16.04, Ubuntu 18.04, and basically you just have to do sudo apt-get install lamp. When you do that, you get everything that you need, even PHP myadmin. So you'll obviously remember that this class requires you to know databases, so you'll need to set up some kind of very simple database. But you're going to build that database from scratch as well, okay? And then obviously through PHP and everything else, you'll be interacting with that database. But those are all things that I have to give you still. But because of that, I need to start PHP as soon as possible, okay? And so my goal is usually that although we start the server side, I do throw in client side things here and there, 30 minutes at the end of class, just to make sure that you're seeing everything. But I feel really after jQuery Ui, you've got everything that you need for the client side, okay? And then after that, it's just looking at other tools, etc. So that's why, as I said, I like to get started with the server side ASAP, and then all the other additional client side things will be covered alongside. So hopefully that won't be too confusing. All right, and so these are some of the requirements of groups of 3. So find, I'm not going to assign the groups. Instead, find, classmates that you would like to work with. So start looking for the VM, a Linux VM. 16.04, 18, etc. So that you can do your coding there. You will have to think about how you're sharing the information, especially nowadays that we're all sort of online, right? So GitHub might be a good resource for that. So I certainly recommend that you take a look at that. And then what is the project? So basically the project is built a database-driven dynamic website, right? That's distributed in the sense that the database could be on another server, the logic, the PHP files in another server, and obviously you're going to be running on the client side. So the website needs to be dynamic, right? And it needs to be database driven, so it needs to have a database, and it should use server side and client side scripting. There are actually other frameworks out there like Python, something called Flask, etc. We won't cover all of those. Ruby on Rails, there just isn't room enough for all of that. I seriously doubt that I would be able to cover those, but I'll certainly try to cover as much as possible of the technologies. And so far, we've covered a few. Okay. Now, as far as what you're going to build, you build it from scratch, right? So build from scratch. So it's really whatever you want it to be. In the past, students have tried to do their own mini Facebook. They have tried to do their own, usually those social media things. A lot of students always like to do social media things. Other students go with the more traditional thing of just doing like a bookstore, e-commerce site. Some students do like airplane ticketing systems. So literally, guys, it's whatever you want it to be. If you're an entrepreneur and you've had this idea all this time and you think that you could actually start building it here, go ahead, okay? So I'm not really objecting to anything. However, I do have to approve your project. That's the only condition. So sometime maybe at the end of in lab, either this week or next week, remind me or just run it by me. Okay, run it by me. You could also send me an email, but if you do, just say, this is our group. We're group, this group. These are the 3 members, and here are 3 ideas that we want to do. And if you send that to me, I'll probably reply back and say, either have more questions or if you're clear enough, I'll just say, yeah, that looks good. I just want to make sure that it meets all the requirements because you will be building it from scratch. This also will, one of the key aspects is that it has to be a website that users a login. All right, so whatever the website you're building, it has to have a login and password. Now remember, in this class, because this is just learning the program, and we have 450, which is kind of the continuation of this one, which covers a lot of web security. I'm not gonna make it so that you have to create like encryption and any of those things. Okay, so just I'm gonna keep it simple. So the security aspect, we'll mention that a little bit, but just keep in mind 450 focuses just on software and website security. Okay, so and actually the project over there is securing an e-commerce site. So which is all built exactly like we're building our program from scratch here. So MVC and everything. All right, so it's a good so that I want to say, because I want, securing the site can be a lot of work, and really I just want you to focus on, using the tools, right? The coding part. But it does have to have a login and password, so database driven also. And I'll provide, obviously, some examples of that later in the semester. We'll do that with PHP. So I think that's it. Hopefully I remember everything, but that's the project, right? So that's kind of, you can get started on it. Are there any questions about the project?
I don't think so.
No, pretty clear, right? Okay, so definitely start thinking about ideas. Take your time, find something that you're motivated to work on, because this will be a lot of work, okay? But yeah, start thinking about it, how you would do it, and then start getting that VM. Send me the email of what you will be working on, okay? All right, so it doesn't seem like there's any questions on the project. So I assume at this point I've sort of informally assigned the project and you can start working on it or asking me questions about it. All right, that aside, then now we can focus on a little more on jQuery, okay? As we continue, and specifically right now as we focus on the client side. So we're going to talk about another tool out there. There's a lot of these. This is just one example, but there's actually companies in the past traditionally that go into business just to create these, right? Really nice. I think I gave the example, like if, let's say that you're going to work for a company and they want all their forms online to look like Excel spreadsheets. Well, that's kind of complex, but you could build something, right, with JavaScript that looks like an Excel spreadsheet. And there's people that sell these solutions, in ASP or JavaScript, etc. So there's certainly a lot out there. This is just one example of these types of libraries, the more traditional one that has been around for a long time. So this one is called Jquery Ui. As you might guess, it is literally just another link or 2 links that you have to add. So we're in the head section, right? So in the head section, we were already adding our CSS, our external style sheet. We were already adding a link for the jQuery itself, the main jQuery. We were adding then our link to our own personal, your own jQuery file. Now we're gonna add Jquery Ui, the link for Jquery Ui, and that's just so that we can bring in these specially built controls that will just make our website, our presentation look a little bit better, our view, right? So in MVC, our view of the website would look a little bit better. So Jquery Ui is a layer on top of Jquery, right? You can go ahead and check out the website. It's got low-level interactions and animations. It's a set of rich effects and widgets. Widgets is usually a term for, like, I usually say controls. They're just the things that you add, like text boxes, drop downs, sliding rules, etc. It's got a theme library, and it allows you to build highly interactive web applications. Right? The kind of things that we're used to in modern times, right? That you've seen over the years. So as I said, you only need to use the hosted versions, basically. Add the links. I'll show you that in the examples. It needs usually some style sheet. It also needs the jQuery library, and it'll need the Jquery UI library itself. Okay, so those are a couple of things that we will look at in the examples. So what does it provide? So it provides for the option of having controls that are more interactive, right? So interactions. So it's a set of mouse-based interactions as building blocks for rich interfaces and complex widgets. So it's got properties like making things draggable, droppable, resizable, selectable, sortable, right? So allow elements to be moved using the mouse, right? So again, it's just a div of some kind in the website. Now the event, the action is triggered by the mouse doing something, and then it's got some behavior. You know, it's draggable, allows the elements to be moved. Droppable, create targets for draggable elements. Resizable, change the size of an element using the mouse. Selectable, use the mouse to select elements individually or in a group. You can reorder elements in a list or grid using the mouse as well, so sortable. So that's really what this provides. And you know, as you might imagine, there's a lot of these, so we're not going to look at all, but it gives you an idea of what's available out there so that you can play with these things. And certainly in your term project, you know, you can add as many as you want, but not just for adding, right? But instead for if they're needed, right? So you have to, you know, even though we don't talk about human-computer interaction here, obviously that's an important thing in this field. So some of the things that you have, feature-rich stateful plugins that have a full life cycle along with methods and events, right? So the whole thing. So the controls, I'm going to be just, you know, calling them controls. I don't know why I do that. All right, so the controls, so things like autocomplete, you know, a text box enables users to quickly find and select from a pre-populated list of values as they type. So it's similar to the effect on Google, right? You guys go to Google, the search bar, you start typing things, and you start seeing a lot of information. Obviously that, you know, what Google does there is very powerful, but that's the same idea that we will do in a smaller scale. So we've got a button. You can have now themeable buttons and button sets. So think of like the Amazon button, right? So it's got a, it's not, you know, it's, you can put a picture, you know, make the button really, you know, yellow or whatever. The button says Prime, I think, and it's got a little smiley face, right, on Amazon. So those kinds of things. You can put a theme to the button. You know, we'll look at date pickers so that instead of you having to type, you know, you've seen me when I do this on Brightspace, right? I just click on something and then I get a little nice pop-up of a calendar, pick my dates and times, and that's actually, you know, it's pretty useful. So, you know, that's basically, you know, and there's a lot of other controls. I'm not really going to mention all of them, but you should be aware, right? So you got things like menus, you know, like a tab, for instance. You know, tabs are nice where you have a control and it's all these tabs and then you click on one or the other. So a single content area with multiple panels, each associated with a header and a list. And, you know, it's just divs within other divs and they have ID names. We just have to learn how to link them. There's a Themeable menu with mouse and keyboard interactions for navigations, progress bars, sliders or slide bars, the tooltip, etc. Right? So as you might imagine, there's a lot of controls, and you're actually, I'm sure, more familiar than me with a lot of other controls that you see in websites. Okay. Then, so that's the controls, the widgets, and then after that you have effects. All right, and we might play a little bit with effects. So they add more functionality. They support, create the feeling of animation, right? Animating colors. They have transitions. So it's a full suite of custom effects that are available for use when showing and hiding elements or just to add some visual appeal. Okay, that's where at that point you need to be a creative person, right? Where you start to really be creative in what you're doing. All right, bouncing effects, so that's kind of fun. Clip effects, etc. Right? So fade in, fade out. So the fade effects, exploding effects, all kinds of things, as you might imagine. All right. So some of these might be fun for you to explore. And so we could, as I said, we could look at all of them. We're not obviously going to look at all of these, but you can check them out. If you click on these, like if you click on, size effect, right? There, that will take you to a, you're not seeing it probably, but it opens up Jquery for you to take a look at information. Okay, so that's the best thing I can tell you is look at all these links, right? So when you have time, go over, click on this one, go over the website, check out what it is. I'll provide some examples, obviously, so I will do that in this week, right? So we'll, I'll pick some, but I can't cover all of this. But you guys can just go ahead and click on them and at least look at the ones that you find more interesting. Okay, so that's some of the effects that are available. Fade in is kind of nice. The fade effect hides or shows an element by fading it, right? So or increasing it in size or highlighting it. Okay. All right. So those are some of those effects, and then here are the events. Apply an animation effect to an element, right? So you can grab an element and then link it to an effect, or to hide, or to show, etc. Okay. All right, so that's basically Jquery Ui, some of the basics that we're going to cover for now. Okay, later on, we might look at a few other things. We're not going to cover mobile. Okay, so we're not going to cover anything with phones. Remember this, you do have a course in mobile web app development. I don't remember the name. I think it's like 460 or something.
It's 440.
440, yeah. So I'm pretty sure when you take that course, a lot of these things focus on mobile will be covered. And when you get to that. So I'm going to skip this part, given that that's not the focus of this class. And then JavaScript later on, as I said, we're going to look at more JavaScript later on as well. We'll talk a little bit about Node.js, which is, as you can see here, for the server side. But that's, a little bit later. Oops. All right, there we go. Okay, so yeah, so there's more about Java, jQuery and JavaScript as it relates to, utilities or mobile. and certainly on the server side. But for this week, we will just go as far as here, right? So we basically, you know, interactions, widgets, and effects. So that's the focus of our discussion of jQuery UI. And then later on, a little more about JavaScript is what's coming. Okay, so making sure I didn't miss anything. All right, so that's it. So you can see that's the last. This is the last slide. So we have some time left. So let's actually just try to do one example. I think that's all the time we will have. So what I'm going to do now is that kind of gives you an introduction of what jQuery UI is, right? So I mentioned it's basically just all these controls and some effects associated with them. So we can then try to do some examples. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a text file, just like I've done before. So I'm going to open my folder 362, and this is jQuery UI. And I'm going to create a text. You should create a text file on your end. All right, and let's see, what are we going to do? Let's try. Let's try a date picker. I think a date picker is like the symbol of this. So let's see if we can build one of those. So call your file date picker. You know, it's an HTML file. Okay. Now I'm gonna open Notepad++. I need to share this with you guys. So you should be seeing the Notepad here. And what we need to do is we need to basically just use jQuery, right? So we're going to use jQuery, but this time around, we need to add the appropriate, you know, some more links. So let me actually just copy, since this already has some information, right? So I'm just going to copy an old one. I don't have to type everything. And then I'm going to add this into here. Now I don't need any tables or anything like that, so I'm going to get rid of the table part. I'm just going to leave like one span. Let's get rid of this anchor tag also. And then I'm going to clear out all the code. All right, so the code is gone. Now we have to think about the links that we need, right? So remember that we always have to look up, this is changing constantly, so I'm just going to try, let's see. I know that in the past I've used, Google has some interesting, so if you go to Ajax, googleapis.com, in the past, they have had information about the latest, you know, library that you should be using. So let me see if I can do that. So I'm going to go to HTTP Ajax dot Google APIs. GoogleAPIs.com. Right, so here, So I'm at that website. Now you can see here, the Google hosted libraries is a stable, reliable, high-speed, globally available content distribution network for the most popular open source JavaScript libraries. Google works directly with the key stakeholders for each library effort and accepts the latest versions as they are released. So here we have libraries, jQuery, okay, d3.js, which is one of those that you can use. So a few other versions here, jQuery, okay. Let's see, they have jQuery here, jQuery mobile, okay, jQuery UI. And so what I would think is probably, I'm just going to borrow these. But you can always just Google, latest, most up-to-date, links, and pick the ones that you feel most comfortable with. Obviously, Google is always a good source. All right, so let me just try these then. I'm going to try the jQuery UI, so these three. Copy, and I'm going to go back to my notepad. Okay, so then, okay. So as you can see with jQuery UI, you usually have to add two things. You have to add, you can see that there. First of all, you need to have your jQuery, right? So I have jQuery here, the one that we were using. Then after that, we added jQuery UI. You can see the name, jQuery UI. And then also you have to add a style sheet that's associated with jQuery UI for the themes. And you can see that one there, the .css. So this, and that just, the only difference between a lot of these that you will see online is that they'll probably have different versions, right? So this seems to be 1.12.1. Okay. So now, let's see, I'm just double checking that everything is correct. If we do end up having some error, it's most likely associated with these things, that we don't have the appropriate. I have the UI CSS, the UI JS, and I have the original jQuery. Let me just also double check what jQuery version they have. So if I go back to that link, jQuery, so they have one of these, I assume would be compatible with the ones at the bottom. But I'm just going to leave the one that we've been using, and if we have problems, we can always try to figure it out. All right, so that being said, that's really all you have to do when when using something like jQuery UI or any other libraries, right? So you got to find them. You got to go to some source like what I just showed you or some other one. Get the latest version for what you need. So assuming these three are correct, then we have our website now, right? It's got all the tags, the head section, the body section. And now what I want to do is I'm going to try to create a date picker, okay? So to create a date picker, I'm going to really have, I'm going to have a text box, right? That's really what I need if you think about it, because I'm going to be, let me just make sure, yeah, I'm sharing the notepad. Okay, so so I'm going to do input here, and really I don't have to say much to this because I'm going to be modifying anyway. So it's definitely a text box, and then I need some kind of an ID, right? So the ID will be, you know, date, let's say, right? And that just allows me to reference that date so I can transform this control into a text box, okay? That's really my goal there. So then, really, if everything is correct, we just have to go into our script over here, right? And pretty much just like we did before, we call the jQuery function, right? And we're going to grab something. In this case, we need to decide what we want to do. Let's say that we run this on load, right? So we're going to run this at the beginning on load, or we can just do the jQuery function like this. Let me see. How can we do this? Yeah, we can just do this actually. Like that, right? We have our function, so this will execute in the beginning. So now we can create an anonymous function, open curly bracket, close curly bracket. And then now in here, we're going to execute our code. So when the document is ready, do something. What do we want to do? We want to make that text box into a date picker. So we're going to, again, grab. We need to grab by ID. So we're going to say date. Now we've got that control. And because we are using these libraries for jQuery UI, etc., we can just transform it into a date picker. And if we did everything correct, that text box will now look like a date picker, will be clickable. And so at least that's our goal. As I said, if something doesn't work, is because of the libraries. And we just have to figure that out, the links. All right, so let's try this. So I think that should work. So let me try to open this. And it doesn't work.
Mine worked when I clicked on the actual text box. It didn't like change the way it looked, but something popped up for me with the code that you had at least.
Yours work?
Yeah.
Mine's not work. Are you seeing my I'm sharing. See it? I'm clicking on it.
Yeah, that's.
Did you open it in Firefox?
Yeah.
Okay, I wonder if I have a typo that you don't have.
Maybe.
That's a good thing, at least it worked on yours, right? And you use the same links that I have.
Correct.
Let me get rid of this.
The only difference is just mine's in a different order. I don't know if that matters. I have the original jQuery link up top, then the link, and then the new jQuery link.
Jake, what's the order that you have?
The one that says code.jquery.com, I have first, and then that's the only difference. It's just yours is after the other two. Mine's on top. At least that I notice right now. Yeah, like that. That's the only difference that I can see right now, at least.
And then I have function, parentheses, parentheses, curly bracket, function, date, sticker, and my input there. Huh. How about the rest of you guys?
Moving it to the top, fix mine as well.
Fix it? Okay, perfect. There we go. Great catch, guys. All right, and that's it. You see, it's as simple as that. So you can now, I'm showing the website here, and we, basically we had a very simple text box, and the text box was converted into a date picker by using jQuery Ui. So now I guess today is February 23rd. Yeah. So if I click on 23rd, there it is. The data is now in your text box. So you can imagine how when you do your when you do your capturing some information like the date, it would pretty much, you'd have it in the text box. So now this text box, you can just do text box.value and you've got the information that you need, but it provides this very convenient way of changing, how that is. And that's it. So I think that's it for today. It's just a simple introduction of Jquery Ui. We will explore the rest of these examples on Thursday. Plus, there should be some time for questions for the homework of this week. And then hopefully next week, we will start with a new topic. And as I said, given that I'm trying to get you ready for the project, we'll try to start as soon as possible with the server side, PHP, but also alongside integrate a few more client side things. Please, one action item, please start looking for teammates. Okay, if you want right now, like I can stay online a few minutes here so that you guys, if you don't know anyone, right, through the chat, maybe you can find some classmates. So let me at this moment pause the